Sacramento Kings were the surprise of the 2018-2019 season, finishing 39-43 and getting the ninth seed in the West. The Kings looked like another promising young team in the stacked Western Conference, so coming into the 2019-20 season, they had plenty of people believing that they could actually compete for a playoff spot in the West. But as we saw, the Kings struggled under their new head coach Luke Walton, finishing 10 games under 500. Unfortunately for Sacramento, that gap will likely grow even bigger this season. Going into next season, I expect the Kings lineup to look like Deaaron Fox at the 1, Buddy Hield at the 2, Harrison Barnes at the 3, and then Marvin Bagley and Whiteside filling out the rest of the starting lineup. Off the bench, they should have a backcourt of Corey Joseph and Tyrese Halliburton, the rookie, and then there's going to be a few guys probably playing out of position here with Bielitsa, Parker, and Kaminsky, but it's just they don't really have anyone else that's probably better at those positions, and then Richaun Holmes at the 5. If the Kings want to have any hope of being good this year, they'll have to play fast. Sacramento has arguably the fastest player in the league in De'Aaron Fox, and their playstyle should reflect that. When the Kings were the 9th seed 2 seasons ago, they played at the 5th highest pace in the NBA. Luke Walton's Lakers teams played a fast, up-tempo style of basketball, so it was expected that that strategy would translate seamlessly to Sacramento. But for some reason, the Kings played pretty slow last year, finishing 20th in pace. Walton's offensive schemes have never been the most complex, so it would definitely help if the Kings tried to go in transition more often so they could get some easy buckets there. Where Walton was supposed to really help the Kings though was on the defensive end. In Los Angeles, Luke Walton did a pretty good job at developing his young players on the defensive end. Guys like Lonzo, Josh Hart, Ingram, Kuzma, and KCP, they all improved as defenders with Walton as their head coach. While the Kings didn't get worse on defense with Walton, they didn't really get better either, and I don't think we should end up putting the blame on Walton for this, but I'm skeptical that this team is going to get much better on the defensive end this upcoming year either. De'Aaron Fox is a good young defender, but his backcourt mate Buddy Hield is not. Hield is 28, and at this point, he kind of is what he is. And when you combine the poor defense he's played throughout his career with the fact that he doesn't seem to have the best relationship with his head coach, in all likelihood, he won't be improving much on defense this season. Harrison Barnes is probably the team's best defender. He's strong enough to guard bigger 3s and 4s that want to try and barrel to the rim, but he's also fast enough to put up a fight against quicker guards. However, outside of Barnes, Fox, and maybe Richaun Holmes and Corey Joseph too, this team is not good defensively. I already mentioned how poor of a defender Buddy Hield has been, but this team will likely be playing Marvin Bagley heavy minutes at the 4, which is not a good thing. Bagley has only played 75 games over the first 2 seasons of his career, but in those games he showed that he's much better at defending on the interior than he is out on the perimeter. In today's NBA, 4s are starting to get quicker and much more skilled offensively too. Bagley, he's had a bad habit of jumping on pump fakes or having poor positioning defensively. He's very athletic though, and when you combine that with his length and motor, Bagley has potential to be a really good defender at the 5 spot, but next year most of the starting center minutes will probably be taken up by Hassan Whiteside. Whiteside is a very polarizing player. If you just look at the box score, you might mistake him for an elite center, but if you watch the games and see him play, you'll find that that's definitely not the case. On defense, Whiteside can block shots and he can grab rebounds also pretty effectively, but his defensive IQ is very low. Where Whiteside struggles the most is in the pick and roll. There are a lot of times where he makes the wrong read, either committing to the guard too much and leaving his man open or vice versa. Whiteside has also had a bad habit throughout his career of being jumpy. He often bites on fakes, falls for guards, change of pace dribbles, or overcommits for a block, which ends up leaving his man wide open. On top of all this, Whiteside often gives poor effort on the defensive end, which is even worse considering that young teams like the Kings, those guys can be very impressionable. Offensively, Whiteside is a good finisher around the rim, but he doesn't have much of an outside shot. What makes things worse is that Bagley will be starting in the front court next to him. For his career, Bagley is a 28% 3-point shooter on just 1.6 attempts per game, so he's not really a threat out there. When you consider that De'Aaron Fox's biggest strength is his ability to get to the rim, the Kings are going to be making life a lot harder on him by playing him in lineups with Bagley and Whiteside. As I said earlier, Luke Walton, he's never had the most complex offensive schemes, and I doubt he'll be able to compensate for this lack of spacing. Off their bench, they have Corey Joseph, who's solid but overpaid, and they have guys like Kaminsky, Jabari Parker, and Bielitsa, who are likely going to be playing out of position this year. Other than Joseph, those guys aren't very good on the defensive end, and they're not dominant enough offensive players to make up for it too much. A silver lining in what will probably be a bad season could be the development of Rashawn Holmes and Tyrese Halliburton. Holmes is a high-energy two-way player. He's a good rebounder, defender, and athlete that can score well around the basket. Holmes isn't the most offensively skilled center, but he's not exactly limited either. Holmes is pretty effective in the pick and roll, and he can make things happen when he has the ball in ISO situations, kind of end of shot clock situations when you have to make something happen. While Holmes hasn't attempted many outside shots throughout his career, there's a reason to believe that he could add a perimeter shot to his game. In 2016-17, he shot 35% from 3 on 1.4 attempts per game, and these past two seasons, Holmes has shot 73 and 78% from the free throw line. Holmes seems to have pretty nice touch for a big. If he could add a little bit of a perimeter jump shot, Holmes would be arguably the best backup center in the league. I'm also really excited to see how Tyrese Halliburton plays in his rookie season. I don't see superstar potential for Halliburton, but I think he's going to be a really good all-around player that complements De'Aaron Fox very well. On offense, Halliburton can play both on and off the ball due to his playmaking and scoring ability. He does a good job of using his frame to shield off defenders around the rim or in the pick and roll so that he can get easy layups or floaters. His shooting form looks a little odd and it might limit his ability to shoot off the dribble, but he has great balance and arc on his shot, which should make him a good spot-up shooter right away. While he's a great all-around player, Halliburton's best skill is by far his passing. First of all, he's a great passer in transition, and if the Kings decide to play fast going forward, Halliburton and Fox are going to present a very deadly threat on the fast break. He's also amazing in the pick and roll as well, and the main reason for that is because he's very patient. Halliburton doesn't over dribble, but he also won't force a pass that isn't there. He just has a really good feel for the game, and Halliburton also has a ton of potential in the defensive end. While he does need to put some more weight on, Halliburton is a 6'5" guard who has a 7-foot wingspan. He could struggle on defense early on in his career as he continues to put on weight, but if he can put on that muscle and he commits on the defensive end of the floor, Halliburton has the potential to be a guy that can defend 1 through 3 pretty consistently. He's just overall a really great prospect, but he's not necessarily the type of player you would necessarily build your franchise around. I would kind of compare him to like a Al Horford in a guard's body. He's not a superstar or a go-to scorer, but he should be a good enough all-around player to make a few All-Star games during his career. While I don't think he's going to start right away, I envision Halliburton starting in the backcourt next to Fox for the foreseeable future once he's there. This current Kings roster does have a lot of issues. They aren't great defensively, they likely won't have the most complex offensive scheme next year, and I'm just not a big fan of how the players on this team fit either. On top of that, you have to have some concerns about Marvin Bagley's health. I mean, knock on wood, you hope that he can stay healthy, but it's definitely something that you have to factor in. Because of all this, I have the Kings finishing 14th in the West at 23-49. I could also see the Kings trading guys like Hield or Barnes in exchange for some young assets or picks by the trade deadline, which would ultimately result in a few more losses for the team in the second half of the season. I would love to make an entire video on what this team should do for the future, but just quickly, I think they should start by trading Hield to the Celtics. The Celtics have a $28.5 million trade exception that they got in the Gordon Hayward trade, so they could trade for Hield and they wouldn't have to match salary or anything like that, so they could send a guy like Langford or Carson Edwards to the Kings and maybe attach a future pick as well. As of right now, the Kings are projected to take Jalen Johnson, a 6'8" small forward in the 2021 draft. If Sacramento drafts Johnson, lets Whiteside walk in free agency, and holds on to Harrison Barnes, the Kings would be looking a lot better. They'd probably have a rotation of De'Aaron Fox, Tyrese Halliburton, Jalen Johnson, Harrison Barnes, and Marvin Bagley, and hopefully Rashawn Holmes as the sixth man if they can afford to re-sign him. It's hard to predict how good a team like that would be just because the West is so deep, but this roster would be an upgrade over what they have now, and they have more cap flexibility. The important thing is that the Kings have Fox locked up until 2026, so now they just need to start building a good team around him if they want him to stay even longer.